Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Mallers for Human Services 201, and I'm so excited to share with you a presentation with Dr. Maria Carpiac. She is a gerontology professor at Cal State Long Beach, and I guess it's okay to share you're also my best friend. So the students kind of have a sense already of my personality. It flows. I like to talk, I like to have general conversations, very organic. So, and I know you know my style, obviously. So I appreciate your time doing this. Let's just talk like we normally talk. And today, all right, today we're talking about gerontology. So for those of you who don't know what that means, it is the study of aging. We get confused a lot with geography, study of maps, geology, study of rocks, gynecology.
Nothing like, no.
We don't do that. But we do study the factors that influence how we age. So first, would you like me to, for formal presentation, do you want me to call you Momo or you want me to call you Dr. Carpia?
You can call me anything you want.
All right. How about Maria?
Perfect.
Why did you become interested in the field of aging? And you are a gerontologist. What does that even mean?
Correct. And it's interesting that I really do consider myself a gerontologist, even though my educational background is in social welfare. So I have an MSW, and then my PhD is also in social welfare from UCLA. Go Bruins. And at the time I entered into that field, I don't think I really knew what population I wanted to work with. I think I would feel comfortable working with any population. Right before I went back to graduate school, I taught third grade. I loved doing that. The only reason I didn't continue to do that is that I am not a morning person, and elementary school starts insanely early, and that just wasn't going to happen for me. But I loved working with that population. And I try to think back to where were the seeds planted along the way, where now I really relate to being a gerontologist more than any other professional title. And I really think it came down to my relationship with my grandparents, in particular, my great grandpa Joe. Everybody knew him as Grandpa Joe, but he lived with his daughter, my grandma, for most of his life. He had what we used to call then emphysema. So he was a smoker since he was like 12, which was not uncommon in those days. And he always had breathing problems and all of that. So when it came down to like his last couple weeks of life, he was at the point where he really was struggling with his breathing. And so at that point, family couldn't take care of him, and he needed round the clock care. So we ended up having him move into kind of a rehabilitation center of sorts. And I remember it being July, and where we live, it gets really hot in July. And we visited him like every day. And I remember going in there like 2 days in a row where the air conditioning in his room wasn't working. And it was blazing hot out. And this guy couldn't breathe well on a normal day. Forget it when it's 100 and something degrees out. And he was sweating and he was laboring to breathe. And we were like, what are we doing? So we kind of decided if this happened one more day in a row, we're going to cause a hubbub. And, you know, we come from a family where it's like, be polite, don't cause a hubbub. So we pull up, and the minute we saw him, we were like, all right, it's hubbub time. So I don't know how I got voted the hubbub maker. But I marched my little like 14-year-old self up to the counter and said, you know what? This man can't breathe on a good day. If you don't move him into a room with air conditioning, our attorney will be here in a half an hour. We didn't have an attorney, but I don't know, it came from somewhere. He did end up passing away in the best room in that place, air conditioning at full blast, I might add. But it made me, I think that absolutely planted a seed, because it made me wonder, all right, what do the rest of the folks in this place do when they have issues and they don't have crazy Italian family members marching themselves up? And, you know, I don't mean to put down the folks that work in these places, because there are lots of issues. There's lots what's broken in the system of assisted living, nursing homes, rehab facilities. But it really, I think, put a little taste of advocacy in there for me. So I didn't really think about that too much. Coincidentally or not, my first class as an undergraduate was a gerontology class, but I didn't really think about it too much about that until I got into grad school. And then I specialized in older adults. So to be a gerontologist, there are lots of different ways to do that. We have minors, we have certificates, majors, master's degrees, which I know Cal State Fullerton has several of those. There are a few doctorates in gerontology, but a lot of us who become gerontologists have training in other fields with a specialty in working with older adults. That was a long answer to your question. I promise not to go on and on like that for every question.
I love listening to you. I don't know what the students think. No. So let's talk statistics. And really the question first is, why should we care about the aging population? We'll get into after, how do we overcome the barriers that keep us from caring about this population? But first, why should we care?
Well, first of all, and I loved your definition of what gerontology is the study of aging. We tend to specialize in looking at older adults and their issues and their life and their quality of life. But really, gerontology is studying the aging process in all of us. So every student watching this video is aging. In fact, you are 10 minutes older than you were when you started watching this video.
Yep, there's a wrinkle.
There's one more wrinkle.
And it's true, because I am part of the gerontological world, but my background is in family studies, human development. I mean, you know that. I'm a lifespan stress researcher, and I look at how early childhood experiences predicts your aging process. But you're right. You
yes, every experience we have. I mean, there are so many factors that play into how we age. And I'll tell you, only 25% of how we age is due to genetics.
Yep.
That means a full 75% of how you're going to be as an older adult, however you define that, we can get into that as well, is really about your lifestyle choices. And many of those choices start now. Now when I say, in your 20s, which I'm assuming many of you are in this class, from the day we're born, many of those circumstances in which we are born into. So, our socioeconomic status, our ethnic, cultural, racial background, our gender, our sex, all of it. All the things you're talking about in this class play a role into how we age. And so I was just going to get back to your original question. Statistically speaking, not only should you care because this is the one universal topic that applies to everybody out there, regardless of their background or circumstances, but in this country and around the world, our population is rapidly aging. Now, does that mean that people are just aging faster like individuals? No, it means that if you look at the proportion of people in, let's say, the United States, we have more and more people living into older ages. And so we've got a larger proportion of our population that is, we use the age 65 and older kind of as a benchmark. That came, we stole that number from Germany back in like the 30s when we started Social Security. It's kind of like at that time, not a ton of people lived to be 65. So to set up some social program where you're eligible at 65, it's like, we can fund this because not many of you live past 65.
Yeah.
It's very different nowadays. But the big statistic here is that in only a few short years, by the year 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. That's 20% of our population will be in that age range. Japan's already there. There are several other countries really close. This is a global phenomenon. So whatever field you go into, I don't care if you're going into social work, working with children, healthcare, accounting, whatever. Yeah. To know something about older adults and the aging process just gives you that much more of an edge to be a successful professional. And in my opinion, just a successful person, family member,
a human being,
care partner. Yeah.
So Intro to Human Services, as you know, we're an eclectic, multidisciplinary field. We're kind of like pre-social work.
Yes.
And so many of our students take this as a GE course. So some are not going into human services, but they're criminal justice students, business, math, any of the MSTEM fields. I mean, everything that you mentioned. And I'm so grateful you brought that up, because even with like our child and adolescent studies students we have here, I tell them, as you do with your students, have a background in aging, because you're going to apply for a job, let's say the Boys and Girls Club,
Mhm.
same resume as somebody else, same GPA, same enthusiasm, same, great interpersonal skills. So what's going to distinguish you? Well, you could advocate for yourself and say, I have a background in aging. I've taken some courses. And did you know that more grandparents are rearing their grandchildren? Let me
Mhm.
help you develop programs that will help better support your clients at the Boys and Girls Club. This is really, I think, one of the reasons you've been put on this planet is to really be the voice and advocate for how do we support the well-being of older adults. So you've done research and consulting for architects and banks, because everybody needs to know about aging.
Not one discipline. And I love the fact that this class is full of people from, you have so much to learn from each other and each other's experiences, each other's goals professionally. There's not one discipline that is not touched by this field of gerontology. I mean, every single one that a huge topic right now is the aging of folks that are in prisons and jails.
Huge.
How do we best serve their needs? And there's this whole ethical question, like, does an 85-year-old with dementia, who still has 10 years to serve, does that person really belong in a prison? And are prisons becoming kind of like pre-nursing homes? I mean, math. I mean, there are so many statistics that we look at in terms of, who's living longer and what groups. Every single discipline this touches upon, and it's amazing for those that want to focus on a career working with children and adolescents. As you said, it still is really important to understand that process, because again, you're going to be working with families who have older family members, and maybe they're super stressed out, and you're like, well, why hasn't Johnny come to class in the last 3 days? And the parent's like, I've been so stressed out, my mother was in the hospital, we have to find her a placement. Wouldn't it be wonderful for you to have, like, oh, you know what, I remember learning a little bit about that, and I think I remember something about there's a hotline you can call, or something like
Right.
that. It's always good to know these things. Yeah.
And it builds empathy, and that's the hallmark of social welfare and human services. I mean, all fields obviously needs to be based on that. But as like change agents is something that we do in our field, it is important to share these resources. They call them like natural caregivers. You get your hair done, right? You have your person. How wonderful would it be if people like that who are in the service industry were trained to just know a little bit about aging and be able to share with your client, oh, I know about that. You can call the Alzheimer's Association. I mean, everybody does need to know this. So
you're right. You're right. Like, how much why is it that we open up so much to the people that do our hair? And, they say bartenders, not that I hang out at bars, but, like folks that tend to welcome conversation.
Yes.
And you see that happening more when it comes to things like partner violence, domestic violence, where there are like code words that you can tell, like, let's say your bartender, if you're feeling in danger. I love the fact that we all are kind of looking out for each other, not just those of us going into the helping professions, but it's just something that, again, touches on all of us. And then we should all have some resources. It just helps us feel a little more able to be empathetic and supportive of our fellow humankind.
Yeah. I feel it's an actual responsibility, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Neuroses. Why do you think that there are so many barriers to people going into the field? And I'll preface it with, and this, there are faculty or amongst the most educated people. Some people do not understand or still will ask, well, what do you do in gerontology? What do you teach?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. So why are those barriers there?
All of it, I think, has to do with ageism. And so when I say ageism, you probably know lots of other isms: racism, sexism. It almost seems like ageism is the last accepted ism. I mean, that's changing a little bit because we have voices that are like, whoa, 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 this is not okay. I mean, but just walk up and down the grocery store aisle with all the greeting cards. You don't see stuff that has like racist jokes on a birthday card. But almost every
Yeah.
birthday card is like, oh, you're over the hill now, time to like, pack it in. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm 40 for God's sakes. I'm not. So I think
That's a very interesting point. On the other hand, I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah.
It is an inevitable thing to age, and it is hard. It's not for the faint of heart. And I have my book. I think you told me, where is it?
Oh, is that link letter or
No,
something?
the one we talked about the other day. If
Oh,
I had my
yes.
life to live over, I'd pick more daisies. But anyway, aging is not for the
You
faint of
have
heart.
that book, because I have a book sitting next to me. When I am an old woman, I should wear purple. See, this is why we're best friends. We have these things at the handy.
I mean, this
My
is not
God.
handy.
But you're right. It's not. Sometimes
Like we have to be able to laugh at it, because
that's what I
otherwise
was going to say.
can be very hard.
Correct. Especially as you and I now, are entering a different developmental stage, I would say, of our womanhood. If you can't laugh at some of the stuff happening, forget about it. That's a little different than the stereotypes that I'm talking about. And it's interesting because there can be we think of negative stereotypes, like old people are cranky, they can't learn anything new, they're this, yeah, all of the negative. There are also positive stereotypes that are just as detrimental.
Yes.
Like, oh, you think it's a positive thing, like I'm going to immediately help somebody if they didn't ask for help. We think that's a kind thing. We have to be thoughtful about that kind of thing. And I'm talking about folks with any sort of physical differences, cognitive differences, older adults. We always want to empower. And so, whereas there are some things that are just polite, like if I'm sitting on a bus, when am I sitting on a bus? But if I were sitting on a bus, I would absolutely get up for an older person, or let's say a woman, pregnant woman or something like that. But to assume a person needs help just because they're old can also be kind of detrimental, taking away some of their power. And the interesting thing that the research shows is that it's kind of obvious that stereotypes are not good for current older adults.
Right.
But what's interesting is that even in childhood, we absorb those messages ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then so we start to form opinions of, this is what it's like to get old, and this is what I'm going to go through as I get older. Yes. And that can have a really negative effect on our own aging experience, even our health, our mental health. So it's really important to challenge some of those messages, and we're bombarded with them. I mean, as kids, like I say, fairy tales, the witch is always this old crotchety lady, in the fairy tales. TV shows, cartoons, movies, magazine ads, we're bombarded with not so positive images of older adults. Again, there's some examples where this is changing a little bit. There's some really cool influencers that are older adults. I'm thinking of like the old gays. I don't know if you've seen, there's 4 older men who are gay who just have they have this huge following, and they're always doing this just fun stuff. And sometimes they talk seriously about issues, but I'm seeing more older adults in the limelight for positive reasons, kind of teaching society, like, hey, it's old age is not all what you think it is. So I think that's kind of cool. And it's a very cultural thing too. In some cultures around the world, old age is revered. Right. It's, you are the elder, you are the one we look up to. And so it can be really different from culture to culture.
Oh, and region to region within culture.
That's true as well. Yeah.
So people often ask, what do you actually teach? And I try to explain, well, what do you teach in child development? Okay, cognitive development, physical development, social, psychological, family. I'm like, we do the exact same thing in aging. I love teaching my aging courses. I think they're dynamic. The content, I don't know if I'm dynamic. The content is dynamic. It's interesting. It's what do you love teaching when you're teaching your Gero students?
I heard an analogy once that if you had a room full of, no offense, 20-year-olds and a room full of 80-year-olds, the room full of 80-year-olds is so much more heterogeneous, because you have, and what that means is that there's so much more diversity and difference, because here you've got a room full of people that have lived their lives for 80 years. It's such a fascinating time of life. The research actually shows that at age 60, our happiness peaks.
Thank God.
Right? I know we're like counting down the
All right, hurry up.
days.
Just kidding.
Like I go 60, 60. I'm 48, just so you know. I feel
Yeah.
like you can't be a gerontologist and be embarrassed of announcing your age. So that is my age.
Okay, you didn't need to set it up that way. You know I'm older than you.
And you don't have to share. I'm just saying, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone nearing 50. I already call myself a 50-year-old. I tend to round up. I don't know why, but whereas most people will be like, I'm 49 up until like the last second,
That's
to
right.
50.
That's
But I'm like, I'm 50. And I already forgot the question, darn it. Oh, why do I like teaching gerontology? I think because it's something that we see around us every day. If we're lucky, we have older family members or neighbors. And then just to know, like, oh, we actually have research about what this process looks like. We know how to do this well. That to me is very exciting to let folks know. I think there's a lot of fear about aging because a lot of folks say, well, aging equals death. Okay,
right.
yes, there is a higher correlation if you are older, and that's going to happen to all of us at whatever age. Hopefully it is when you are very, very old. There's so much fear about it. And I think a lot of that fear comes from misinformation or just no information. So to give students information about, yeah, okay, you do have a higher risk of getting chronic illnesses. And these are things that could happen, but normal aging is not disease. And I think it kind of opens up a whole new world for students, in that you don't stop developing, you don't stop growing, you don't stop learning as you get older.
Right.
And so many of those early theorists, those early developmental theorists, kind of stopped at a certain age, as if we don't continue to grow and develop as we get older. And I think that did a lot of folks a disservice. And then to answer your question as to what do I teach, it ranges. So just like in social work, it can be very individual. So it can be about, we do a health assessment class where we teach students how to assess folks on lots of different things. My favorite thing is to have them go out and do a sexual assessment on an older adult, which freaks them out, which is fantastic. I like to freak my students out.
So pause there for a second, or actually finish talking about what you teach, and then I want to come back to that topic specifically.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. I teach about death and dying, end of life issues. I teach about social policy because there is a lot of policy that it's important. I think, again, if you're going into the human services field, social work, gerontology, you need to know how our political system operates so that you know where you can insert yourself to do some advocacy or empower folks to do their own advocacy. And that goes for whatever group you work with. You need to go to a city council meeting or watch one virtually to see, well, when do people get to speak up about what's important to them? Yeah. You need to know who your local, state, and national representatives are. And it's not scary to make a phone call or send an email saying, hey, you know what? I'm really concerned about whatever your concern is. You would be, I think, surprised to find out how our elected officials really do care. And when they get a little note from somebody, they assume that you're speaking for at least 100 residents of their area. So that's the social policy. I teach dementia. And then I teach a lot of like our research classes for our master's students to teach them how to become responsible consumers of the research that's out there. So gerontology is extremely interdisciplinary. So we cover the biological, psychological, social, spiritual, all of that, because all of those things influence how any of us are aging. So I think that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, I love it. And it fits certain personalities when you are creative and you want to intersect ideas and you want to put things together that you wouldn't normally put together. So I want to jump to research, but I'm going to stay on the topic of sex and aging. The reason I want to do that specifically is because this is typically when you wake students up. Okay, we have to talk about this. My parents do this. Even my grandparents do this.
Yep, they do.
Yeah, they do. And the research on it is fascinating, right? Because
Yes.
there's a lot of hiding. They don't like, grandma doesn't want anybody to know that she actually is dating, and she hides her boyfriend's shoes, etc.
Yeah.
But what
Grandma.
I love is using that as an opportunity to challenge the stereotypes that we do have of what it means to grow older.
Right.
So we have students in our master's in gerontology program. One is studying trans elders, so 65 and older adults who are transsexuals. A lot of students never even thought about that as a population.
Right.
In human services, we talk a lot about vulnerable populations.
Mhm.
We talk about mental illness and poverty, interpersonal violence, sexual assault, HIV, AIDS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And very rarely do students or even other humans think about this in the context of aging. And
Yes, I was just going to say every single topic you talked
yep,
about that you're
yep,
studying in this
yep.
class, in this field, also applies to older adults. Older adults are having sex, they're getting sexually transmitted infections, they
Mhm.
are using drugs, and I don't just mean like the baby boomer pot smokers, they're using cocaine and heroin and, you know, all of it. They are, you know, all those things that we talked about, all the things that you would think like grandma doesn't do that. Well, guess what? Your grandma may not, but older adults in general are still living.
Yep.
And so when we ignore the fact that, you know, they may be sexually active, we miss the fact that, you know, so many, and again, I don't want to be uh, down speaking badly about any profession, but so many healthcare providers are not properly prepared
Right.
to treat older adults because of their own stereotypes. So
Yeah.
they forget to ask an older adult, are you sexually active? And, you know, are you monogamous? Are you using some sort of protection?
Mhm.
Because, you know, and this changes cohort by cohort.
Yep.
You know, when I first got into gerontology, it was more my grandma's generation, which was the silent generation. Now, the folks that are really moving up into that, the major bulk of older adults are the baby boomers. So those are folks born between 1946 and 1964. So that's my dad, my mom, my aunts and uncles, even some of my friends, you know, who are on the later end of the baby boomers. So, you know, they have very different experiences growing up with drug use and with sexuality and sexual expression. And so we have to train our healthcare providers, for example, to become comfortable asking those questions, because the danger is that folks go misdiagnosed,
Yeah.
and or undiagnosed, and that's a problem. And we actually see that nursing homes have STI outbreaks because folks are having relations with each other. And there are lots of ethical issues with what do you do if you have folks living that have dementia or not dementia, and maybe they live in nursing and they both have cognitive impairment. They get together, but they actually legally have spouses. It's like there's so many fascinating topics.
There really
And
is.
there really is. And there's so many issues in this field that never before in history have we come upon these issues, and we don't have solutions ready to go, you know? So I love being in this profession and thinking about these issues because there's so much room, like you said, Melanie, about being creative. One of the classes I can't believe I didn't mention in my list was I had the opportunity to create a class specifically about women in aging.
There we go. Golden
And
Girls.
I it's called Women in Aging Lessons from the Golden Girls. I would say probably a quarter of you in this class even heard of the Golden Girls. It's kind of had a little bit of claim to fame in pop culture in the last few years, but it's a show from the late 80s and the 90s about four older women who have all either divorced or lost their husbands by death. And one woman owns a home, and so she rents out the rooms in her home to be able to keep affording it. And those four women become best friends. And this show is so ahead of its time. It talks about all the topics we've just covered. It covers drug addiction, sex,
AIDS,
yeah, HIV, AIDS,
sex.
gay
Yep.
relationships, all of it.
Yep.
So, you know, these are topics, again, I just urge you students not to forget that everything you're talking about in this class, older adults are a part of this, about a part of the phenomenon that you're studying.
I think it's always fascinating as I get older, and I see how my son, like my older son, Josh, you know him, starts to recognize I don't have my shit together. I'm him. Well, not him. I'm a young adult also who's just sort of has more years.
Oh, none of us
And
know what we're doing. We're
still
all
trying to figure it out. Yeah.
kind of faking it. I think there's this whole thing. I'm not sure if you've talked about it at this point, but imposter syndrome,
Oh,
where
you haven't, but yes.
yes, where most of us feel like we're totally faking it. Like, we earn these titles like professor, doctor, mother, whatever the title might be. And I know some folks in this class are already parents, and I know not everybody in this class is in their early 20s, so I appreciate the diversity in the class as well. But many of us have this kind of feeling like I'm totally faking it. I think it's important that we, in our professional development, whatever field you're going into, I think that developing that confidence that, okay, maybe I'm not an expert, even if some people think I am, I have something to offer.
Yeah.
And, it might be from my research and what I've studied. It might be from my own personal or professional experience. But it's so important that we all just give whatever we can give. But, they say that a lot of folks kind of, when you survey older adults and you ask them, how old do you feel like in your head? Like, how old do you psychologically feel? Most people kind of stick around 30. That's what the research shows. So like, even though I'm nearing 50, it's like, I still kind of feel like I'm 30. But I have to tell you also, for those of you that are in your earlyish 20s, when people tell you this is the best time of your life, you better enjoy it, because that's bullshit. It's bullshit, because I tell you, with every passing decade so far, it has been better and better. I still feel like I'm faking it sometimes, but I'm getting to know myself better, and I'm caring less and less about what others think, because I think part of that realization is that the people that are like, oh, well, you should be doing this, and those people are faking it too. So I think that as you get older, and I think that's the big point of this piece of our conversation, is that yes, it's so easy to think about the things that decline, the things you lose as you get older, because let's face it, you get into your 80s and 90s, you're probably going to outlive a lot of your friends, maybe some of your family. There is a lot of loss. However, there's also a lot of good stuff that happens as you get older. So don't forget that.
I think part of the imposter stuff is feeling like, well, I'm at a certain age now, I should have my shit together. My relationship shouldn't be so complicated. I thought I'd have it figured out by now. I'm at the peak of my career and I still don't know what I want to do. I thought I had more confidence to know like how to resolve a conflict, but I still feel like I'm back in high school with the three girls who are being petty. It's just a fascinating journey growing older.
It is. And it's so funny you mentioned the example of like, this seems so junior high. Have you ever gone into a senior center and you've watched women, especially, like, I'm sorry, this seat's taken. This is like part of our group. It is so junior high. Oh my gosh. But life is a cycle, and they say if you're not learning, you're dying.
Right.
And so I don't think any of us ever finish. We don't get to the point where it's like, okay, I've reached age blah blah whatever it is, and say I've learned everything there is to learn about myself, and I don't have to make mistakes anymore. I don't think that is what life is ever.
I used to think it was. I remember sitting with my professors as a college student going, I am so anxious. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't feel good at this and this and this, and them saying just relax, it will all come together. And it does.
It does. It comes together, and then maybe it falls apart a little bit, and then it comes together again, and then maybe some of that falls apart a little bit.
Yeah. What we do know, and I'll get back to where I wanted to head, is having non-toxic relationships, having good friends where you feel safe, you feel loved, you feel not judged, you can share your deep dark secrets with if you want to. that is such a key to successful aging. Is you cannot do this alone. You've got to have at least one person.
I have to put my hands over my heart when you say that, because that is you in my life.
Do.
Yep. And what you say is not just mushy gushy, talk amongst best friends. It's actually backed up by research.
Yes.
In fact, I'll tell you about a really cool it's kind of a movement. It's not just a study, it's a movement. It's called the Blue Zones. And so there were some geographers, not gerontologists, geographers, who were looking at populations and how I know she's looking for her Blue Zones book right now.
I have it.
Populations are distributed and the age ranges of populations across the world. And these geographers noticed that there were some parts of the world where there were people that lived way longer than 100 years, and not just lived beyond 100 years, but lived well. Like, we're still pretty independent, we're very active, and they would circle those places on the map with a blue pen. And so that became known as the Blue Zones. Okay, so we knew that there were these places around the world. This one journalist from National Geographic magazine, Dan Buettner, look at that.
This other book. This is Thrive.
Oh, Thrive, yes. But
So
he's
good.
really built upon that. And there's actually on Netflix, there's a whole series about this, and it's so well done. But Dan was like, okay, so we know these places exist. What do these places have in common where people are living such good quality of life for so long? So he visited each of those places. Places like Loma Linda, California, which is not far from us. Places like a place in Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy. These places all had these blue zones. So he went there and he interviewed people. He met with the older adults. He culled it all down in his book into what he calls the Power 9. And these are 9 lifestyle choices or lifestyle traditions that all of these places had in common. And one of them, I won't tell you all 9, I'm going to make you look them up, and maybe you can write about them in your discussion or something. But one of them is to find your tribe. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Melanie, is that we know from research, having a social support network is more important than the food you eat, how much exercise you get, whether or not you smoke cigarettes. It's your social network. And what does that mean? There's a whole bunch of literature on social networks. It's not so much quantity, it's all about quality. It's having the person that you described. It's having that person that you could call at 3 a.m. and say, I'm struggling, I need you. I'm dropping everything, I'm coming. Having that is the most, I'm not even gonna say one of the most important thing you can do for healthy aging. So I know that when you're a student, you get wrapped up, especially some of you who are students, full-time employees, parents, and maybe care partnering with grandparents or parents. Oh
and
my
doing
God.
internships. I don't know how the students do it. They're
bow down to
yes,
you, because
agreed.
Your plates are way fuller than my plate ever was as an undergraduate.
Yeah.
But nurture those friendships however you can. And, there are going to be times in your life where you and your friends are at some stage, maybe you have young children or whatever the situation is where you can't get together, but just find ways to let that person know you're there. Yeah. It's just important to foster those and to make new friendships too. I mean, Melanie and I didn't meet until, 15 years ago. So we weren't, even though we could have probably been friends as kids because we grew up in the same geographic area. Sometimes I think that's also what I'm learning about friendships as I get older, is that long time, it's the length of time doesn't necessarily mean they stay in your life.
That's right.
It's a really hard lesson to learn, that sometimes people come into your life for a specific reason and they don't always, sometimes they exit your life.
Yeah.
But yeah, foster those social relationships. It's as important as, eating your greens or whatever the other things we're supposed to be doing.
Eating greens and your dark colors. I wanted to switch to going back to stereotypes and some ageism. And again, one of the reasons I love this field is because it bursts bubbles. It bursts preconceived notions of self and other. And that really is probably the legacy I want to leave to students is to challenge your perceptions of self and obviously of others, but of yourself. My mom rarely says things like, I can't remember, where I put my keys. I must have Alzheimer's. No, you don't have Alzheimer's. You know what your keys are for. You're aware that you lost them. This is part of normative aging. So that leads to this conversation of the stereotypes we have of older adults, whether it's just lay people or doctors or healthcare providers. They think depression is a normal part of aging. Well, of course she's depressed. She's 90. Nothing we could do about it. Well, she must have Alzheimer's or dementia. Well, have you made sure she doesn't have a urinary tract infection? Can you speak to some of that? It literally gives me goosebumps because it makes me so angry that
that's what stereotyping is so dangerous.
Yes.
And I kind of alluded to this a little bit, and I appreciate you bringing it back up, that there's a big difference between normal aging and disease states. And one of the biggies that you mentioned, dementia. I mean, how many times has someone, oh God, I'm having a senior moment. Oh Lord, you're not having a senior moment. Our brains change. We learn differently as we get older, and that's fine. That's normal. It's really important not to dismiss what's going on, because like you said, if we just dismiss, like, okay, all of a sudden grandma is doing some strange things and she's not remembering my name, you don't have to, first of all, don't dismiss it by saying, well, all people her age can't, don't keep it together. But don't jump to conclusions either, because like you mentioned, an undiagnosed urinary tract infection, for example, could totally be a reason someone seems like they have like Alzheimer's the next day. So you have to rule out a lot of other things before you go with dementia, for example. And that is such a fear amongst people who are probably more our ages and older, or if you've had a lot of family members that have had Alzheimer's or other kinds of dementia. I'll just mention dementia is the overarching phrase that describes a set of symptoms that include cognitive impairment, judgment impairment, memory impairment. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. It accounts for probably 70-ish% of dementias, but there's other dementias. So there's
80 plus, right?
Yeah. So like Bruce Willis, for example, has Lewy body dementia. So that's a very different dementia. There's also Parkinsonian dementia. There's lots of other types. So just that right now puts your knowledge about that, just like you are way more knowledgeable than the general population about that in 30 seconds. But it's super important that we think carefully about just throwing out those kinds of things like, oh, that's it, I must have dementia. And I love your thing about the keys. It's not dementia. It's normal to misplace your keys. It's time to be concerned if you no longer know what keys are for.
Right.
That's a good designation between the two. And there's some amazing resources out there to help families learn more about what dementia is all about. The Alzheimer's Association is one of my favorite websites. They have chapters all over the country. They are just a fabulous resource for just brushing up on what is this? What signs do I look for? What if, in fact, my family member has dementia? What do I do now? It has so much good stuff. And the other thing I'll say is I had a great grandmother, and then her daughter, my grandmother, had Alzheimer's and died from it. So my dad has been very kind of like, oh God, am I next? And I asked him, I said, at what age did grandma, we call them, we're Ukrainian on that side, so babcia and prababcia, what ages were they when they developed it? And he's like, probably mid 80s, late 80s. I said, that is probably not genetic dementia. It's more genetically linked if someone's diagnosed, let's say in their 50s.
Yeah, early onset.
Or earlier. That's a more genetic link. But every single one of us at age 85 has a 50-50 chance of developing some cognitive impairment. Not that you're going to go full-blown, dementia, but by 85, we all at this time have about equal. So if you have family members, if you happen to know that you've had grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever, have dementia, don't automatically assume that's your fate. We understand so much more about how to prevent dementia. Whatever's good for your body is also good for your brain. So exercise, antioxidant diet, keeping inflammation low. Those are the things we know, because at this point, Alzheimer's, for example, is not curable. They're working on it constantly. I mean, I used to go to an annual UCLA conference on aging, and there was always a keynote about Alzheimer's, and they're constantly learning more and more. So I have hope that if not in my lifetime, that in the next generation, there will be a better prevention, maybe cure. But, there's cause for concern because there are going to be a lot more people with it because of the growing aging population. However, I don't feel like it should keep you up at night necessarily. Just do the things for prevention.
That's right. And separate, I guess, last point on this, I'm having trouble talking now because I want to talk about 1,000 things and I'm mindful of your time. Is aging is a family experience. So for Alzheimer's specifically, let's say, is one of the worst diseases I've ever seen. And it impacts the entire family system.
Yeah.
So that's why those social relationships are so significant, whether it's within family or whether it's your friends who you've chosen to be your family. We really do need to connect.
Yeah. And family, like you said, I'm glad you said that because you mentioned the LGBTQIA plus group that for a lot of folks in this age range that are part of that group, their family is a lot more friends than blood relationships.
Yes.
And in other cultures, I know like in my Italian side, we call folks that aren't truly, if you did like DNA tests, are not my cousins, but they're cousins. And I know that in Black families, there's a lot of you're my cousin, even if you're not truly related. So
right.
We want to always consider family as a very wide net. But your point is taken. We need our villages to help us get through some of these.
And animals, we can include that in our family too. I mean, we know how important that is for our aging process. It offsets loneliness and isolation. I wanted to just kind of go back to some of the research that's being done out there. Some of the research you do, for example, and maybe what your students are doing. So I mentioned we have a student who's studying the trans elder population and trying to understand what it means for your identity as you grow older to be a trans person, and what does it mean to be a trans person and its impact on how you age. We know that HIV and AIDS is a huge issue among older adults. If you looked in previous data, like when Viagra spiked, you saw an increase in HIV/AIDS among postmenopausal women. And there's a whole
and a lot more marital problems for older adults because women were like, I thought I was done with this, and the men were like, no, we're not.
Yes. So we have students who have studied that. We've had students who have studied the impact of drumming on reducing stress among older adults.
I love that.
I do too. And mindfulness programs, how to reduce stress for older adults among that, art therapy, how to access healthcare utilizing your iPhones. Talk to me about some of the research that's fascinating to you.
The drumming really piqued an interest because music in general, and to kind of piggyback on our last topic of dementia, there's a fabulous documentary called Alive Inside, where they use music to tap into the parts of our brain that even if we get dementia, that there are still areas that have memories. And this documentary shows folks that live in nursing homes or memory care units who basically spend their whole day with their head down, their hands clasped, just, existing. And then they'll put earphones on them with music from maybe their young adulthood. And they just there's this one gentleman that I'm picturing right now in my head where he was like one of those just kind of, just gone, and then put the earphones on and playing whatever. And he's singing and dancing, and it is just, tears. So there's so much that's untapped. So music is one of those areas that I just am in love with as a musician myself, and an avid karaoke singer. God help my poor friends. I'm personally very interested in a movement called Age Friendly, and it started with the World Health Organization and a movement about age-friendly communities. the underlying theme is that if you create a community that is friendly to older adults, it will be friendly to people of all ages and all abilities. And so that then grew into the age-friendly university movement. There's now also an age-friendly business movement. So I've been doing a lot of research on the age-friendly university movement, and different universities all around the world have committed to doing whatever it is we can to make our universities as friendly as possible to older students. Universities in general have been designed to serve traditional aged students. So 18 to 24. Nope, 18 to 24, yes. That's kind of the traditional age at which folks come to college, undergraduate. But as we know, even from your own class, I'm guessing that you have folks that are not in that traditional age range. And so we call folks from 25 to 49 non-traditional students, and then students age 50 plus as older learners. And so that non-traditional / older learner group is actually growing, because people are retiring and then they're like, okay, I'm retired, I'm 65, I'm healthy, I've got lots to do. I don't necessarily want to keep working in whatever field I was in, but I want to go back and get an education. And, you and I both know a prime example of that. One of my former students, or our former students, and now one of my colleagues, his name is Casey, he's 83. He had a full career opening restaurants and hotels and living around the world. And at age 63, 64, he helped care for his father-in-law until the father-in-law died. And he was fascinated, like, okay, we've got some work to do in supporting folks who are care partnering. And so he came back to school and came back to our master's program, earned his master's in gerontology at age 64, decided he loved it, got another master's in educational technology at age, I guess he was 66 at the time. And he is now known on our campus as one of the technology gurus of all the new, he's so super into AI stuff right now. And so he's 83. Like, everybody else is like, when is he going to retire? I said, I'm not allowing him to retire. And his wife says, please don't let him retire. I want him home all the time. He's a dynamo, and he brings fresh perspectives about cutting edge stuff to our campus. And so
he's a successful ager.
He's a super successful ager.
And yes, he has good genetics, I'm sure, but
he's not without he is living with cancer. He has had health conditions.
Yeah.
Successful aging doesn't mean that you've managed to avoid, all the negative stuff. It just means that you are growing and learning despite that.
Well, they say, right, the successful ager is one that can adapt to the aging process, right?
And you know what? When people find out what I do and what I study, they say, oh, so what's the key? And what you just said and having social support network are the two things I always mention. Make sure you keep friendships, at least one good one that you can always depend on, and don't fight aging every step of the way. Embrace it, laugh at it, adapt to it. If you love to surf and you are now at the point where it's too scary, it's not safe, then take up boogie boarding. That brings up another cool documentary called Surfing for Life, where they're like 80 and 90-year-olds who used to surf and now they're doing the boogie boarding. Find a way. If you love having sex with your wife and all of a sudden you have some chronic illness that gives you a lot of pain, find another position. You know what I mean? It's like, adapt so that you are doing the things that bring meaning to your life. And that's different for every one of us. For me, if I lose my ability to walk, someone better put me in a chair so that I can take my dogs around the block. You know what I mean? That's the thing. Someone better plant that karaoke mic in my hand so I can, do what I'm going to do. And that's going to be different for somebody else than it is for me. So know yourself, know what's important to you, do what you can with those preventive kind of things, do the right thing to take care of your body and your mind and your soul. And then the rest of it, you just have to adapt to, because there are some things we cannot control. So find a way around it, through it, over it, under it, whatever, get creative.
So I want to end because of time. I don't want to end actually, but because of time, we're going to move towards ending. I love that original research from the 1970s where they were first, and I don't remember the authors right now, first starting to understand the importance of autonomy and independence.
Yes.
And the nursing homes where they brought randomly, randomized the residents. For half of them, they gave them a plant and said, take care of this. There were other factors too. The other half said, oh, we're giving you a plant. We're going to come in and take care of it for you. And then you look at the longitudinal data of it, and the people who ended up living longer were the ones who got to take care of the plant themselves. Such a small, minor, nearly insignificant experience was a huge factor in their happiness, their joy, and obviously their morbidity and mortality. That says, so there's so much potential in aging if we are doing it with dignity, with choice, and we feel empowered. So you just kind of speak to that.
Yes. So that's the greenhouse effect. That was the phenomenon that was studied. So there were these experimental, and they still exist. I wish that they were more prevalent, where you give people a role. So we don't warehouse people and stick them in nursing homes to go to die, but this is where you create community. And it goes back to that blue zones that I was talking about, that there is one, now I'm telling you two of the Power Nine. So about the find your tribe. The other one is to find your purpose. And so in Spanish, they call it the plan de vida. In Japanese, one of my favorite Japanese words, it's called ikigai. It always makes me think of like, that's an icky guy, but it's ikigai. It's your purpose. It's your reason for getting up in the morning. We all have it at this age. What makes us think that we lose that necessity to have some reason for getting up every morning? And again, as I said, aging is a unique process. We are all unique humans. It's going to be different for each of us, but it's so important to give older adults the opportunity to find their ikigai, to find their plan de vida, and to find a way to live that out. So if helping fold napkins for lunchtime is something that helps a person feel like, hey, I'm contributing to my home, get people involved. And it's really interesting because even some of the assisted living communities that I work with that I would consider at the top of their game forget to do this. You have folks here, like I said about the room of the 20-year-olds, the room of the 80-year-olds.
Yeah.
You have folks here that have lived rich, just lives of experience, have talents, have knowledge that doesn't go away just because they've retired or because they've gotten older or even that they've lost their memory a little bit. People have something to contribute. So find out what that is, tap into it, and find a way to allow folks to contribute to whether they live at home or they live with their families or they live in assisted living or whatever. It's really important that people feel like they matter. And again, I say that goes any age, any circumstance. I know you mentioned that some of the folks in this class are interested in criminology. They're interested in working with children. It doesn't matter what life circumstance a person finds themselves in. Everybody wants to be needed in some way.
That's right.
So certainly that goes throughout life.
Well, just then to circle back and to close, I said I would do that already. You mentioned earlier on when we're talking about ageism and stereotypes. One of the stereotypes is, well, to be a good person, I'm going to help this older adult. I'm going to open the door for them. I'm going to bring them their dinner because they're tired. Well, that's potentially disempowering them. So like we do with our children, and I'm not saying we infantilize older adults, but you need to be an effective part of the system. So grandma, I need you. I did this with my grandma. I need you to cut the carrots, for the matzo ball soup. Don't just assume that we don't want to make them dependent. We want them to have purpose. We want them to have choices. We want them to feel critical, right?
Correct. Yeah. So maybe just try saying, may I help you? Or, ask first, or say, can you help me? I mean, how many older adults out there do you think are asked, hey, could you lend me a hand? Could you, pass me a napkin? Could you, whatever it is? I think that would be like a very welcome surprise for a lot of older
simple
adults.
Things. Hey, mom, can you give me your opinion on this? Even though I don't want her opinion, I ask anyway.
I guess it depends on what your mom is like and your relationship with her. Oh my gosh.
So Maria, do you have any last closing statements? Because you are, as always, dynamic and passionate and friendly and transparent and real. And just what would you want to end with for your students also?
Um, I think the thing that I'm learning in my ripe old almost age of 50 is we need to give ourselves some grace. Have a sense of humor when you mess things up, because we don't learn unless we mess things up. Always strive to learn about yourself, about the world around you, about the people around you. Keep fostering that compassion and try not to take anything too seriously, I would say. Just keep learning. And if you have a fear of aging, I would implore you to keep looking into some of the things, kind of figure out what is it about aging that gives you some anxiety, and then get some information, educate yourself. It might not make the fear go away totally, but I really do think that information is power, knowledge is power. That's why I believe so much in education.
Right.
That's why I do it for my profession. And you probably sensed my passion about this topic. Find your passion. Life is too short to have a career where you spend a ton of time on your career. Hopefully you find that life-work balance, not work-life, life-work balance. But if you're gonna have a career, then find something that you are passionate about. And I'm sure that everybody in the class kind of has a sense of what that is. Don't let anybody tell you, you can't make a career out of that. Because let me tell you, 20 years ago, people would be like, gerontologist, what the heck are you talking about? I mean, people even have the same thoughts about social worker. Like, well, it's nice you're a good person, but how are you going to live on that? How are you going to feed yourself? I'm doing fine, thanks. So, yeah, I just wish all of you the very best in finding your paths. And, if you know your path, getting to wherever you want to be on that path. And you have an incredible guide on the side. That's what I call you, Mel. You're not necessarily, you're not the sage on the stage. You're kind of like the mentor in the middle. I think that's what I would call you.
Well,
but you have an amazing mentor in all of this. So good luck to you with the rest of it. And thank you for having me join you.
So much for your time. 201 students, as usual, if you have questions, reach out to me. There will be a weekly discussion post related to this, and no barriers.
Yeah, exactly.
Contexts. All right, my dear friend, sending you love.
You
Thank
too.
you. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.